Hello and welcome to Books HSS, a podcast by the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at LUMS in collaboration with Radio LUMS. For this podcast, we invite faculty at the HSS department at LUMS to talk about their books. And for today's episode, we have with us today Dr. Mohammad Waseem, who is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at LUMS, and we will be discussing his book, Political Conflict in Pakistan, published by Hearst in 2021. Welcome, Dr. Waseem, and thank you for being with us today. So before we delve into the book, could you tell us a little bit about how this project came into being?
Well, I've been writing on this subject in various ways. For example, my research focused in recent years on ethnic conflict, religious conflict, sectarian conflict in Pakistan, and of course the civil military conflict. And overall, I developed a kind of a theoretical model which looked at the whole issue in a larger framework of the nature of the state itself. So that was, let's say, the beginning. And in this book particularly, I developed a kind of a model for conflict in a particular framework. And that framework is one of the post-colonial states. So that's how I came to it.
Thank you. So the first theme that you raise in the book is how to begin to conceptualize political conflict in Pakistan. So could you tell us, our audience, how you go about raising this question?
Yeah, conflict in Pakistan is visible and has been so. There is no conflict resolution structure in Pakistan. That is the whole issue. How is it? For example, in the West, a state and society developed in a way together in the 18th, 19th century, and they also developed kinds of mechanisms whereby the demonstrating, protesting citizens out in the street, they would be siphoned off to the parliament, for example, where their representatives would meet and try to resolve their issues. That kind of synchronization in terms of development of state and society did not exist in other states. And of course, at the other end, there is the model where there have been traditional societies and traditional states, for example, in the countries in the Gulf next door. So there, again, there wasn't a big challenge from outside the state because it was very much rooted within the society. In the case of post-colonial states, the way I have discussed in this book, there is a modern state in terms of, for example, law, in terms of the bureaucratic machinery which rules the country and administers it, and in terms of the army, which is the most institutionalized organ of the state. This has been the pattern in colonial societies, where the state was modernized in terms of transplantation of ideas, philosophy, and institutions of Europe into these colonies. On the other hand, the society has been traditional and still is to a large extent, although it has been penetrated deeply by modern law, modern court system, modern bureaucracy, and so on. But that particular dichotomy continues to exist. So I think that that is the point where lies the non-availability of a conflict resolution mechanism.
Thank you. Thank you for that. The second major theme that you explore is the way the partition of India and subsequent migration sets up the stage for exploring the question of political conflict in Pakistan. Could you elaborate on that for our audience?
Well, there I think I have sort of reinterpreted the conventional wisdom in a way. For example, the two-nation theory, our classical writers like Quaid-e-Azam and others, they claimed that there was for 500 to 600 years, a continuing conflict between Hindus and Muslims. And that is what the two-nation theory was all about. Now, when I looked into these issues, I found out that for hundreds of years after conversion to Islam, people were still not taking it up as a mission. There was a plural society throughout India, and people lived next to each other, belonging to various religions, not only Hindu and Muslim, but also later on Sikhism, and of course minority religions. So what was it? When did it happen? After 1857, when the British were finally the established rulers all over India, either directly or indirectly, there we see that in late 19th century, the community formation took place among Hindus and Muslims and others. And I see that this is a kind of an age of religion. When Musaddas-e-Hali was written, for example, when there was the Arya Samaj founded, and of course the Sikh Renaissance also goes back to that period. From that time onwards, that is late 19th century to the mid-20th century, that is the period, that is the 3/4 of a century, that this division came to full fruition between the religious communities of these two mega religions, that is Hindus and Muslims, but also vis-a-vis other communities. So I see that this is one of the areas which need to be explored. Second, of course, partition was obviously accompanied with migration. Now, migration has played a fundamental role in Pakistan's politics. For example, India got 4.4 million refugees from Pakistan areas, which means it was around 1% of the Indian population. In Pakistan, according to the 1951 census, there was around 20% of the population in West Pakistan alone, which was migrant. And not only that, on top, of course, our first Governor General was a migrant from Bombay, and the first Prime Minister was a migrant again from UP, Karnal area. And there were others, for example, the big business. Quite a few businessmen came from Bombay and some from Calcutta. Almost 3/4 of those who are at the helm of affairs in the business field in Pakistan. And of course, then we have bureaucracy. Higher bureaucracy was dominated by the migrants, both of the Urdu-speaking stock and the Punjabi-speaking stock. So there we have financially, economically, and bureaucratically, and even intellectually, people who came from India, the Muslims, and they shaped the policy and the structure of the new state. So that is how a new ethnic hierarchy emerged, where, for example, the Urdu-speaking Muhajirs, they were on top, and then followed by Punjab, and then other communities. So at that particular time, we see that two communities lost their urban sectors. One, Bengal, that was because of partition. Calcutta was gone to India, and here was the huge area of peasant hinterland that came to Pakistan. In Sindh, the same phenomenon took place by way of migration, not partition. This means that the Hindu middle class migrated to India, and there was a big vacuum here in Sindh, whereby, of course, then the migrants from India came and they dominated the scene, particularly the cities, And that led to a conflict between the two communities of Sindh. And not only that, again, the majority province, that is Bengal, was not fully represented in the state structure. For example, they were, even after 20 years, they were 13% in the bureaucracy, 10% in the army, whereas they had 55% of the population. So all these kinds of anomalies developed because those who came to the top did not belong fundamentally to the areas where now the state was formed. So along with these issues, then, we see that democracy was shunned by the most modern elite which came to rule Pakistan because their constituency was left in India. So elections meant political death. And that's why for 23 long years, Pakistan did not have a national elections based on adult franchise. It was only in 1970 that framework came to an end because there was a kind of an indigenous revival, particularly in Sindh and in Bengal, but also there was a backlash from Punjab as well. So state took roots finally in 1970, but that was not to the liking of the ruling elite. And that's how whatever happened after that. So I would say that these conflicts emerged essentially due to the particular nature of partition and migration.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So moving on to the next theme that you explore, which is the features of the master narrative deployed by the ruling elite in Pakistan and the various ways it is challenged by forces from below. So if you could elaborate on that theme for our audience.
Well, when I did research into the narrative which finally dominated the new country, I found that there was a kind of otherization. This phenomenon is very important because it's adversarial in nature. There has to be an enemy. So people started believing in friend or foe, in patriotism on the one hand, and of course treachery on the other. So you are either with us or against us. There was a kind of a framework of thought where the very reason that Muslims opted out of India, jumped the ship, so to say, that was in a way interpreted in terms of larger phenomena. For example, clash of civilizations. 𝘗𝘬𝘭𝘪𝘵, for example, talked about it in terms of a constitutional problem. That here it is that we have failed to reach an agreement with the Congress, particularly in terms of Muslim representation in post-independence state. And since we are not satisfied with the arrangements till now, therefore we have opted out, hoping that the two countries will remain friends with each other or whatever. But that was not to happen. And the nation has developed a kind of a negative thinking, not only against India, let's say, but against West itself, because we, more than Americans, believe in the clash of civilizations. So Islam versus the West has been a running theme, let's say, in Pakistani narrative. And if you want to understand the way the nation thinks, you have to bring in, for example, Edward Said's definition, where he says, nations are narrations. Whatever they speak, that's what they are. So in a way, this situation where Pakistan continued to, in a way, fight against the imagined and not so very imagined enemies, that meant that it led to a kind of hate message and our narrative did not allow the local cultures and local languages to compete with, let's say, the national language. So that was a problem, because there were only 3% people in Pakistan whose mother tongue was Urdu, whereas 55% people spoke Bengali, 38% Punjabi and Saraiki, and so on. So language was not to be a source of legitimacy. That was where our cultural narrative, unfortunately, landed. And similarly, the linguistic ambitions were denied, the Saraiki and, of course, Sindhi and Bengali and others. So there was also a kind of a culture conceived as a mission, as an agenda, that we will now transform the culture of this new state into an Islamic culture. On the other hand, there were people who believed in the culture of the land and the people. So various ethnic communities were very much alienated in this process. And of course, religious minorities, they felt alienated as well. So our master narrative tended to dominate, but it elicited challenges from various other sources within the nation.
Thank you. And the theme that you broach after that in the book is that, contrary to popular opinion, the two real power centers in Pakistan are the middle class and the political class. Could you speak to our audience about how you elaborate on this theme?
Yeah, that's funny that there is a vast and growing and intellectually and professionally rich middle class in Pakistan. But there is far less research on its social, political, cultural attitudes. So that needed some kind of research, because here is middle class, which, for example, provides a large number of officers in the army, and of course in the civil bureaucracy. And there is a large professional middle class, even apart from those who enter the state employment. So this middle class has a certain attitude towards politics. And for the last 75 years, middle class has been, in a way, able to shape the public opinion about the political class, that it's corrupt, it's given to nepotism, it's self-seeking, it's not fully committed to the national interest. It rather talks of public interest, particularly in terms of constituency politics, where the politicians tended to have some kind of patronizing attitude towards their voters, and so on. So what we have here is that the middle class, which is otherwise modern, but its modernity is not sensitive to democracy. It believes in meritocracy rather than democracy. That's why constantly you hear the word that people should elect the educated ones, those who are, in a way, morally up to the mark, and so on. The representative character of the politicians is where the answer lies. That is, the people who want their real representatives. They represent, that is, the politicians represent their respective constituents. They are what their voters are. So, merit, that is very much, in a way, something where the middle class itself excels. For example, there is a near monopoly over higher education in the middle class. So they want that people should be behaving that way, those who are in the parliament, going by, in a way, selection rather than election. Because merit is, for example, the basis for recruitment to the services. But that doesn't go for people's representation. That was the contest, let's say, in Victorian England, for example, when there was the universal franchise introduced. Later on, again, female enfranchisement took place. So what we have there, if you counted only on merit, then what about the interests of the larger mass of people? They have their interests. They want the children to be educated, and they want health system to work for them, and of course shelter. So there is a misunderstanding, let's say, of democracy, that it should only have those who are the educated people, meritorious people, and so on. So I think the overall role of the middle class in Pakistan seems to be that they like the kind of stability which, for example, military rulers have brought to Pakistan, whatever level of repression it might represent. So I think middle class is not very clear about it, particularly because it upholds the mega issue of corruption as its fundamental agenda. And who will take the nation out of that particular mess? The leader. So leader is a janitor who will come and clean the dirty stables of politics. That seems to be where the hero worship comes in.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You refer to Pakistan as an establishmentarian democracy in the book. Could you clarify for us what you mean by that and the salience of this concept in understanding political conflict in the region?
Well, establishment is a household word in Pakistan, isn't it? Everybody,
Yes.
From the voters to the politicians to the political leaders to the military and the bureaucracy themselves, the two state apparatuses which are, in a way, together described as establishment. But this is essentially a military-led establishment. So, establishment is there in every state of the world. America, England, France, Germany, India, other countries are not necessarily represented by the army. There are various kinds of establishments which, in a way, function in the in the task of stabilizing the system. So apparently we talk about mature democracies, America, England, other countries. Actually, there are establishments. Sometimes, for example, in the American case, it was described as military-industrial complex. That was considered to be the establishment. Similarly, there are other patchworks which work as the establishment. In Pakistan's case, somehow establishment has not been suffused by the state system itself. For example, in India, where the establishment is even stronger than in Pakistan, and of course Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, we don't see this bipolarity. There is the political element, those who go and fight elections, they win or they lose, and there is the establishment which is considered to be a separate element from whatever takes place by way of elections. So the establishment doesn't fight election, but it gets involved, or at least in the past it has got involved in elections one way or the other. That's why I have described, for example, the establishment and its role in shaping and making what is called democracy in Pakistan. Lately, for example, it won't go for direct intervention. The establishment has, in a way, operated through the only game in the town, which is democracy. So the so-called third wave of democracy, as Huntington talked about it, so many countries are now democracies. But then again, there is the word hybrid. There is the hybrid regime. So are they hybrid regimes? Dozens of them. They are, in a way, authoritarian in their exercise of power. So they are called electoral authoritarianism examples. So in Pakistan's case, I've discussed this particular aspect, that there is a force which is supra-political, and it sees to it that its preferences are taken care of when policy is made, and when the people who come to power through elections, they tend to, in a way, follow the line, the script which is already there. There then comes in the military's role. So I've talked in my book about the military metaphysics. How does military consider itself, for example, in terms of institutionalization, in terms of considering its own merit? After all, it's merit-based recruitment, which we see in the army and, of course, in the bureaucracy. So the very criterion of entering into the state apparatuses is different from the way politicians come to power. Or I should say to office rather than power, because that needs to be further, needs a further definition about where power lies. So establishmentarian democracy means that apart from the political parties and leaders, there are other players on the political stage, particularly the establishment, which is military dominated, but also judiciary. So there is a whole section on judicialization of politics in Pakistan. Sometimes the two establishments, that is the military and the judicial establishments, have worked closely. Sometimes they have faced each other from different angles. And there I would say that there has been a clash of institutions, and that has been a consistent feature of the body politic of Pakistan.
Great, thank you. Next in the manuscript, you talk about how educational institutions, civil society, and more recently, social media are avenues and fora through which political conflict gets mediated. Could you speak to that?
Well, I have developed a framework for my analysis in this book, which is described as mass politics. There is a mass public in Pakistan. That means that there are actors on the political stage other than those from the state. That means, of course, the state apparatuses on the one hand, that is the state elite, and the political elite, those who fight elections and come to power. Apart from these two actors, there are others. So I've described it in terms of this public space. There is a discursive space out there in the society. Now, this space is, of course, utilized by those who are not very happy about the system. One is, of course, street power. You go to the street and demonstrate against certain policies, against, for example, certain things happening which destroy the peace of the society, like terrorism or the price hike and various other issues, those issues which bring public to the street. There is, therefore, some space. And, of course, there is space for writers, for those who do research who operate through the media, and they write whatever they want to write. There is always some kind of self-censorship, of course, which means that there is a kind of a line which you don't cross. But in majority of the cases, you will see that there is some kind of expression of public will, not only through mass action, that is out in the street, not only through the written work, that is the research, or through the media, through the coverage of news and views. There is intelligentsia out there. Sometimes there are cases, for example, where the intelligentsia, at least some members of the intelligentsia, are persecuted. But in an overall sense, there is some kind of a societal input into whatever is happening in the political field. So there I talk, for example, about the civil society, from the example of Poland onwards, where civil society has been considered responsible for bringing democracy in the country, which of course then led to shedding away the communist regime. That has been discussed, that is civil society as origin of democracy. So you would hear about strengthening the civil society. Why has Pakistan no democracy? Well, there is a weak civil society. And similarly, other countries. In India, of course, the domineering role of BJP and Prime Minister Modi, that has not left any significant space for those who were considered secular, liberal, who believed in, let's say, cooperation among the followers of various religions. All that public space has, in a way, shrunken in some way. So these countries where this kind of regime has set in, their civil society has not played a significant role in establishing democracy. That is why I have argued with this notion. Civil society contributing to democracy, hardly. I think that NGOs have been doing credible work out in various localities, under various projects, including, of course, spreading education about elections, about issue formation. But since there is no engagement with the masses, civil society will always remain limited in its impact. It's only the political parties which go out to the country at large, mobilize people in terms of, for example, awakening them to various issues at hand. So I think that the two phenomena, that is the work of the civil society and the work of politics, they tend to follow different rules. And that's why nowhere in the third world, at least, civil society has contributed to strengthening of democracy. And my second area of research in this field was education. While media shapes opinion, I believe education shapes mind. It's far more fundamental to understanding the psyche of the nation. So education in Pakistan, unfortunately, has not served a purpose. Here, various education policies have been discussed in the book during the last 30, 40, 50 years, how each policy turned out to be, in a way, less significant than its makers hoped for. Mostly, there was the focus on morality, ethics, Islam, good behavior. What it lacked fundamentally was expanding the horizon of the students. For example, I have talked about the dwarfing of the minds of the people. In the West, if you compare with the West, let's say, so what do we see? That there is a horizontal framework where, for example, a typical school or college student, teenager or older than that, would know more about the neighboring countries and about the continents, about the cultures of the world, farthest and the closest. They, in that sense, are world citizens. By way of travel, they go to other countries far more than we do, probably because of the prosperity which they enjoy. So their education system covers a larger area, geographically speaking, and of course, culturally speaking, and of course, studying various religions, and so on. And there is a second aspect, that is the vertical imagination. For example, students in the West would study past, then the ancient past, and then they go back to paleontological times, then further back to geological times, how the Earth was made, the whole solar system and whatever. So all that is unfortunately missing in our educational curricula. Therefore, the mind remains far less sensitive to these issues than their counterparts in the West. And of course, there's the last thing, which is the media. If I have not taken too much time, the media. Here, of course, we first had the press, and then we had have the electronic media, and now the social media. So in all these ways, media has spread its tentacles. It makes and shapes our opinions more than ever did before. And it has, for example, in the form of social media, a kind of citizen journalism, which it has developed in recent years. And its outreach has increased to a very large extent. What does it mean? In one sense, it would have developed social communication, person-to-person communication, making people rich in terms of their enjoyment, in terms of their broadening of horizons, in Western countries and so on. In some countries, like in Egypt and in Arab countries in general, we saw the Arab Spring that was very much rooted in the social media. In Pakistan, somehow, the social media has become, particularly in the hands of the trolls, a platform for spreading hatred. It has been it has had a divisive impact. So no collective agenda has been formed, developed, and that means it's very anarchic in its message. In fact, there is no widespread message coming out of the social media, except that there is a lot of expression of adversarial sentiments rooted in different parties or different opinion groups. For example, there are liberals or there are religious groups and others. There doesn't seem to be a consensus on the political system. That's why the opinion is coming from all kinds of opinion blocks, and that means it has led to more confusion and more dissension and more hatred, unfortunately, than there should have been.
In a nod to Benedict Anderson, the last chapter of your book conceptualizes what you refer to as the unimagined citizens of Pakistan and the dichotomy between them and what you call the insiders. If you could elaborate on that for our audience, please.
Well, there has been a lot of discussion about the insiders and the outsiders. This dichotomy has been discussed in the framework of power holders and those who are almost always on the margins of a political system. In Pakistan, I have discussed the outsider in terms of their ethnic identity, religious identity, and sectarian identity. For example, those who are, in my reckoning, outsiders, particularly in ethnic terms, Bengalis, Sindhis, Pakhtuns, and the Baloch, and of course there are others such as Seraiki-speaking people. They have this profile about themselves as outsiders. Why? Because they feel and they felt when Bengal was here with us that they were on the margins of the power structure of Pakistan. Policies were made by, allegedly, the two ethnic communities, Muhajirs and the Punjab. So these two communities, that is the Muhajirs and Punjabis, they are understood by those who are outsiders in their own framework of thought. They feel that these two communities have tended to take the country and its culture and its politics and its foreign policy and its educational policy and other policies in their own preferred way, in the direction which they set. Of course, Punjab carries the majority of population in Pakistan, 54%, and then there are Muhajirs. Together, they have been holding powerful positions in the army, in the bureaucracy, in the business, and among the intellectuals. And of course, the ulama again have followed the two major sects which actually have their roots in two madrasas. Both of these madrasas are now located in India, that is Deoband and Bareilly. So Pakistan's population, a majority of it, belong to these two madrasas or their followers. So here we have got not only ethnically speaking the Muhajir and Punjabi dominance, but we have the Sunni dominance, and there are sectarian minorities, for example, Shias, and of course Zikris and Hazaras and others. And along with that, we have the religious minorities, Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians. So there has been this pattern of alienation of these people, for example, in terms of jobs, in terms of cultural alienation. For example, in Karachi, when TV started in long ago, 1970s or whatever, for a long time there were only Urdu dramas. Sindhi came to the forefront much later, and that was in a way alienating its impact. And the same happened to other communities. There is a feeling that there is a process of outsiderization, if I may use the word, because insiderization has been used, for example, by scholars. So there has to be more inclusive reality on the ground. Culturally speaking, for example, the demand for language-based expressions of identity, in the case of Sindh, and before that Bengal, East Bengal. And to some extent, actually, even in Punjab, which is in a way linguistically agnostic predominantly, here also there are Punjabi nationalists or sovereignists who are trying to promote Punjabi, because Punjabi is not even taught at the primary level, not to talk of the secondary and other levels. So there is this attempt to go past the barriers which are put by the language. So these, that is, the people from the smaller provinces of Pakistan feel that non-recognition of their languages and their literatures by default means that they are not in the mainstream. That is what relegates them to an outsider status. So I have discussed all these groups of outsiders, and I have also, in fact, discussed how the state operates. For example, a state cannot afford to alienate the outsiders beyond a certain line. So the state first separated Karachi from Sindh, but then after it saw that there was quite a bit of revolt against it, Karachi was again made the capital of Sindh. The same happened, for example, to recognition of Bengali after several years of demand when the damage had been done. Similarly, there is the quota system, which was essentially aimed at protecting the Sindhis in the framework of Sindh. And there has been quite a lot of criticism from the Muhajir community, which is an insider. But the state decided not to reverse the quota system because it doesn't want to let the outsider community go beyond a certain line of alienation. So it has accommodated. Similarly, Kalabagh Dam, the state and the center, that is the central government in Pakistan and Punjab, both have been in favor of the Kalabagh Dam, that there will be prosperity, more land under cultivation because of irrigation, more electricity will be produced. But this logic failed with Sindh, KP and Balochistan. Their assemblies actually passed resolutions against Kalabagh Dam, and state, despite its ambitious project on the paper, it has not gone ahead with taking the project in earnest. And of course, there are other things relating to the outsiders. For example, repatriation of Biharis in 1970s and 80s. It was a hot issue, but the state felt shy of bringing Biharis back to Pakistan, despite the fact that they were the committed citizens of Pakistan and they fought for Pakistan. But there was this feeling that the Sindhis will be extremely upset about it because it would disturb the demographic balance of the province. So again, state has been holding it back. So that was the idea of painting the whole image and profile of the outsider.
Thank you, Dr. Waseem. What lies ahead? What are projects that you are thinking of working on from here on?
I've been, for example, writing on the 18th Amendment particularly because there is quite a bit of concern at the state level, that is, at the level of the central government, along with the institutions, that we went too far in distributing the national wealth. The provinces have got too much out of the national exchequer, whereas provinces are dug in. No, this is our share and we will not let it go. That seems to be a continuing battle, actually, between the center and the provinces, and that has got my attention. I've written on it and soon to be published. And of course, currently I'm talking, or rather thinking, about elections. Elections have been my forte. I've written books and articles on elections in Pakistan, and the oncoming election, hopefully in 2023, I am ready to take it up as a project, and hopefully I'll write a book or a longish article.
Thank you so much for being with us today, and for
Thank you.
for elaborating on your arguments in the book. Thank you.
Thank you.